Okay. So we are recording. All right.
Yeah.
So I am introducing Dr. Carolyn Willekes, who is the horse lady, more or less. And Carolyn, tell everybody how you got into doing ancient history in the first. How did you wind up where you are?
What's my origin story?
Yeah, what's your origin story?
Um, the origin story. Uh, I mean, maybe becoming an ancient historian was maybe not entirely accidental. So I mean, I was going to be a veterinarian. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like every young girl is like, I'm going to be a veterinarian.
Yeah, I went through
Um,
that.
yeah. I mean, in my first defense, I started as wanting to be a paleontologist, and then I switched to living animals. I was like, well, I'm going to be a veterinarian.
Okay. Oh, I was going to do
And like even
oceanography. So,
Ooh,
well,
nice.
I
Yeah,
lived in Florida,
yeah.
so
Oh,
Anyway, go
that
ahead.
kind of makes sense. So yeah, I was all like, oh yeah, yeah, I'm gonna be a veterinarian, and or then it was like, oh, I'll be a zoologist or like a wildlife biologist. But then science, I liked biology, but the rest of the sciences were not exactly my forte, and math
Mhm.
definitely
Yeah,
was
math.
not my
No, no
forte.
math.
Math and I have a very strong love-hate relationship with one another. I call myself Dr. No Math. By the time I was finishing high school, it became pretty obvious that I was not going to go into science. Um, and so like in my last year of high school, when I was applying for university, discovered anthropology, and I was like, well, this is pretty cool. Keeping in mind that I like didn't really take history classes or anything like that. Like the one ancient civ class offered at my high school, I did not take. I took a science class instead.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started off in anthropology, where I discovered that, really my fascination was with the past, was with ancient cultures. And so in my first year, I was taking some electives, took some classics courses, and the rest, as they say, is kind of history. I realized that anthropology, you had to do statistics. I was like, heck no, I don't want to do that.
More math.
Um, more
Did you
math.
do your undergrad at Calgary? I can't remember.
No, I did my undergrad at the University of Guelph.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so I was
Okay.
at the university with the vet school, and I did
Okay.
work in the Equine Research Center my first year there. So, like adjacent, um,
Okay.
but but yeah, I ended up switching my major into classics because I kind of just fell in love with it when I took the electives in my first year, and uh, and it realized it would let me study the ancient cultures that I'm so interested in. I mean, my one hesitation was, I think, as for many of us, the languages.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
dropped French after grade 10, saying that I was never going to have to study languages again. That was hubris, because then I ended up in classics where we do all the languages, it feels like
Yes.
sometimes. So I
Yeah.
remember, yeah, I was quite apprehensive about Latin and Greek.
Yeah.
And we had three classics profs at Guelph, and one of them, Dr. O'Cleary, Patrick O'Cleary, who passed away last year, sadly, um, who I'm convinced the man was a leprechaun. I mean, he was Irish. He was from the Dublin area. He had twinkling blue eyes. And I remember him looking at me and being like, oh, I'm not even going to try the accent. Just be like, oh, Carolyn, don't worry. Latin's not that bad. And so I signed up for his 8:30 a.m. first year Latin class, and it was that bad. But
Gee, yeah.
I had the addiction to classics by then, so I
Yeah.
just kept going. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I got into classics, was discovering it, that I had a passion for it completely unexpectedly, like apropos of nothing, through a couple of electives I took in my first year, and yeah,
This is
changed the
cool.
course of my life forever.
Yeah. 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 The languages, and for people watching, it's we have to do Greek and Latin because a lot of times folks don't know. So obviously we need to do Greek and Latin, and then we have crazy people like Jen who also did what, Akkadian too.
Acadian, yeah, she did a second
Um,
PhD, yeah.
I know, that's scary. And then I had reading German and French. What did you have to do? Same.
Yeah, so I did. Sorry, I'm being attacked by my puppy. I did
That's the
German for my master's, and then had sort of toyed with getting permission to do Russian for my PhD, just
Oh,
because I was looking
uh-huh.
at Central Asia so much.
Right,
But then,
right.
just with the order of the exams for our our candidacy exams, the utter hell that you go through as a PhD student in North America, it is the worst part of your PhD.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Your whole career
the
depends on this few
rest on
sets
whether
of
you pass
tests.
these
Yeah.
exams. And so I had sort of talked about doing Russian, but then because I had to do the modern language exam quite early on, I was just dusted off my French. So So yeah, I did
Okay.
German for my master's and French for my
Yeah.
PhD.
Yeah. I wish now my German was better than it was at the time. And yeah, I wish I'd done Italian or Spanish. Spanish,
Mm,
actually. I wish I'd done Spanish because so much is coming out with Borges
good
and Mark
Spanish
and
now.
various others.
Yeah.
Yeah. But because we have the reason people wonder why the heck are you doing these modern languages? Because our colleagues don't always write in English,
No,
and we kind of have to read it.
and especially for Greek history, the big one has always been German.
Yeah.
Like that has
Yeah.
been the thing that you have to be able to at least muddle through with,
Muddle
wrestle
through
with,
German. Yeah,
because
muddle through is a very
uh,
good description of my handling of German. And
um,
then if I don't understand something, I'm like, and it's usually Sabina's article. I'm emailing Sabina and say, what are you saying
what
here?
do you mean? What does this
Help.
mean? Tell me. Yes, I've
Anyway,
recently over the last year, I was in Austria last spring for a couple of weeks, and so that was kind of like an
nice.
impetus to sort of like dive back into some intensive German. So I've tried to keep that
Yeah.
going and work on some German every day because Germans love the
Yeah,
ancient Greece and the Germans love horses. So
they do.
yeah.
All right. So, as I kind of said at the beginning, you've become the authority on horses in a lot of ways in cavalry across a huge variety of places and periods that culminated in your book. And I told you to, did you bring a copy? Do you have a copy handy?
Oh,
Oh,
I
I
can go
pulled it.
grab one.
No, I
Oh, there we
pulled
go.
it. There we
Yay!
go.
Way more organized than I
Yay.
am.
This is Carolyn's
Yay!
book. There'll be a link in the show notes to her page, her stuff on academia.edu, how to get her book, etc. The Horse in the Ancient World. So I've often wondered, because I read through here and you cover a bunch of different things in here. How much overlap is there really in truth, and how much difference? How's like Macedonian cavalry, and for that matter, Thessalian, like and unlike what we're seeing in Persian, Asian, even later Roman?
So, I mean, you could approach this from a couple of different ways. So, you could approach it from, sorry, I am being joined by a puppy, da, da,
Yeah.
da, who hopefully doesn't
Oh,
unplug
hi.
us. This
Is
is
that
this
the
is
new puppy?
Whimsy.
That's the new puppy.
This is
Yeah.
the new puppy. Yes, Dozer would break my chair if he tried to climb up here with me. Bless him. Um, Dozer, for everyone, is my other dog who is about 100 pounds, so he is much bigger than this one. So yes, and we could approach it from sort of the idea of tactics and equipment, in which case you do see differences between the different regions, or we could approach it from the context of horse behavior, which is obviously kind of a unifying factor, because whether you're talking about a horse in Persia or Central Asia or Southern Greece or anywhere, I mean, a horse is a horse, right? We get different body types. We get types of horses that are better designed for different forms of warfare, which is kind of what I talk about in the book, is how environmental conditions create different types of horses. I don't like to use the term breed, I use type. And so basically different body types as a response to their sort of local natural environment. And then these body types can then be used um, to sort of in different ways on the battlefield, right? So,
And I'm
a
just going to
horse
point out
like
there are pictures in her book too.
there are pictures. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was before we had all of these open access things. Like it was before like the Met and everything went open access. So that was a trip figuring
Yeah.
out image permissions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I mean, from a basic kind of like psychological perspective, horses are
Mhm.
prey animals. They're afraid of absolutely everything, literally. Like my horses, they very frequently run away from their own fart. Like they fart, they panic, they bolt. Like they're running away from a sound coming out of them. Um,
I love
the
it.
prey animal, right? It's a prey animal. The flight instinct in the horse is strong, right? So kind of the basic mechanics of they're a flight animal, they're a herbivore, they're a large animal, they're designed to be able to run very fast for a long time. Like that's their primary defense mechanism. They are, of course, capable of fighting. So if a horse can't flee, it will fight, but their kind of instinctual response to
Mhm.
danger, if they can get away, is always to flee. So that's kind of an underlying aspect that shapes mounted combat, that shapes cavalry combat throughout history, is having to grapple with this very key aspect of horse behavior and sort of horse physiognomy and that sort of thing. But then we do get different styles of cavalry. And here they are, I think, very much a response to the environment and then the lifestyle of the individuals who are using them. So, for example, in Central Asia, You think of like the Central Asian steppe and our Scythians, which is kind of a catch-all term for
Right.
nomads with
Those
horses
people
on
up
the
there.
Central Asian grasslands.
Yeah.
Um, they tend to have quite small, very hardy horses because they're a product of their environment. The Eurasian steppe is the only place I've ever traveled where I don't have to explain what the weather is like in Calgary and how bloody cold it gets here in the winter because it does the same thing there. And so they don't give their horses a lot of supplement. Like traditionally, historically, they haven't like stabled their horses, given them a lot of extra supplemental feed and that sort of thing. It's kind of been survival of the fittest. And so it creates these tough little scrappy, hardy horses. And because of the nomadic lifestyle, these horses have to be able to cover quite long distances with minimal resources. And so in that case, it makes sense that you have these smaller horses. I mean, all horses were small in antiquity, but small horses that have loads of endurance and can just run and run and run and are really sure-footed. And that was really ideal for the quintessential form of Central Asian cavalry, which was mounted archers, right? Where
Mhm.
you don't have to let your horses don't have to go anywhere near the scary thing, which is your opponent, right? They sort of gallop them in these big circles. Traditionally, that's the way they'll do it is they'll sort of like gallop them around the outside of the formations of their opponents and they just start firing arrows. And so what you want is kind of like a small, tough, hardy horse that can run for a long time and isn't going to trip over its own feet or step in a marmot hole or something like that. So they didn't need these big, muscular, robust horses.
Yeah.
Um, and then to sort of counter that, we can look at the Persians, the Achaemenid Empire,
Yeah. Yeah.
and one particular region, Media, which is where we get the Nisaean, what we call the Nisaean horse from. And it was this really kind of famous type of horse in antiquity. And it's just it is more robust. So it's not a tall horse. It's still kind of what we would refer to as pony size, so a small horse, but it's thick, like super thick. I call it like the football linebacker of sort of the ancient horse types. And the simple reason is because of the fact that alfalfa, which is a type of grass, alfalfa is native to this part of the world. So Media is kind of modern Iran, parts of modern Iran. And alfalfa is a really top end horse food. So when we make hay, what we're doing is basically drying grasses. And there's different kinds of grasses. And alfalfa has the highest protein content of any of these grasses. So a horse that's fed an alfalfa rich diet is getting more protein and so is going to just automatically develop more bulk. And so you get those thicker horses there, which sort of enables the Persians and then their descendants, like the Parthians and the Sassanids. I mean, they're all kind of the Persian groups,
Mhm.
to develop really the first truly heavy cavalry, where you have the heavily armored horses and more heavily armored riders. So kind of the precursor to what we might think of as our sort of high medieval knight and their plate armor and stuff like that. They're not using
Mhm.
plate armor in ancient Persia
Right.
or sort of like late antique Persia, but they have the horse with the carrying capacity to do it because the weight carrying ability is all about having a horse with a broad a sort of a wide but short back and like really dense bones in their legs. So again, that's just the fluke of the environment. When you look at Greece,
Mhm.
it's very mountainous. So you get these, again, smaller, lighter horses that tend to be quite narrow and sort of adaptive to different environments because they work well on sort of the rocky terrain of the mountains. They do okay in sort of hot, dry environments. But a particular talent is, again, their ability to navigate these narrow pathways up and down the mountains. And so it's really a case of then exploiting this to certain types of warfare, whether it's the equipment you're using, the tactics you're using, the armor you're wearing, I suppose is the equipment you're using. Yeah, all of that. So
Okay. All right. So what made the Macedonian and the Thessalian cavalries especially formidable? So we'll narrow it down from general
mhm.
into um, Alexander, what he's bringing with him. So how do they function and how are they being used?
So again, part of it is just environment, well, not just, but part of it is the influence of the environment. So if we look at mainland Greece, so modern mainland Greece,
Mhm.
the Greek peninsula is something like 4/5 mountains, right? Most
Yeah.
people, if you haven't been to Greece, if you don't study Greece, you don't really realize this, but it's a
Yeah.
hecking mountainous country. And mountains are
You
not
can't go
ideal for,
anywhere and get away from mountains. They're always on the
no,
horizon. Yeah.
they're just there. They're there all the time. And like in ancient Greece is very much shaped identity and polis development and stuff like that. But it also shaped access to horses. You can, of course, breed mountain horses in mountainous environments. They have lots of them in Greece, but you can't breed them on a large scale, right? For any sort of any sort of large scale horse breeding, you need space and you need food, which means you need wide open grassy plains.
Mhm.
Because you have to have space for these horses to go out and graze, to be able to raise them in large numbers, and you have to be able to feed them. So, really, what we see with Thessaly in particular, but also Macedonia, is that these are sort of two of the main regions in mainland Greece. There are a couple others, kind of like, around Olympia, Elis, that kind of area, but Argos. But really, for larger regions, you have Thessaly and Macedonia, where you have these spaces, these sort of plains, and well-watered plains that are well suited to the sort of large scale what we call hypotrophia, which was the ancient Greek word for horse breeding and horse rearing. So Thessaly is by far the most prominent. I mean, Thessaly is like this perfect little enclave in Greece for
Yeah.
horse and cattle pasturing. I mean, they are like the original cowboys, cowgirls. I don't know. I mean, they even have like bull wrestling on their coins. It's amazing. Steer wrestling, I guess it's bulls, but we would call it steer
Yeah.
wrestling today. But they have bull wrestling on their coins. It's fantastic because you have these really wide open plains. You have the rivers that run through Thessaly, so they're well watered. They're like ideal for raising large livestock like cattle and horses, and the two just kind of seem to go hand in hand. So it makes sense then that Thessaly is going to develop a military force that is based predominantly around cavalry as opposed to infantry. And this does give them a certain reputation in the rest of Greece, right? For being like, oh yeah, they're like almost like quasi, like they're the ones that sort of elite aristocratic kind of different societal
Yeah.
structures with
Yeah.
their
Yeah. Yeah.
tyrants and stuff like that
Yeah.
on
It's
horseback.
like a
Um,
weird, yeah, it's like a weird transition, I think of between
yeah,
Thessaly, Epirus, and Macedonia. You go
yeah,
from Macedonia with the absolute kingship, Epirus with Molossians and their council, and then Thessaly with whatever the hell that is.
yeah.
So
They're
yeah, it
tyrant adjacent
yeah, yeah,
quasi
yeah, whatever. Yeah.
monarchic rule. And so this idea of the horses also kind of becomes tied into I think
Mhm.
especially in like the Athenian democratic psyche, this notion of like single rule or kind of like non-democratic rule.
Yeah.
So we get that in Thessaly, and then same thing in Macedonia. Macedonia is more mountainous than Thessaly, so you sort of have
Mhm.
the more mountainous part of Macedonia, and then the less
Yeah.
mountainous part of
Yeah.
Macedonia. Which again, we know that one of the primary forms of economy in Macedonia was animal husbandry, and that did include
Right.
horses. And
Yeah.
again, having these sort of larger breeding operations because of, again, the social structure, the way that's designed, where you have the really wealthy, powerful
Mhm.
landowners and then the people who
Mhm.
work the land for them. I mean, it's not quite serfdom, but kind of along those
Yeah,
lines to a
it's headed that way.
degree.
One of the things, and correct me because I'm not as familiar with Thessaly. I think Macedonia is a lot more swampland than
It,
Thessaly, right? That gets in the
yeah,
way of the horses.
it's a
Okay.
bit bog. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not, it's got more grassland than other parts of Greece, but it's not as perfect as Thessaly.
Thessaly is.
Because again, you've got a
Or
bit more of
Bulgaria.
sort of marshy. Yeah,
I
Bulgaria's
mean,
got some good
Bulgaria
horse
is,
breeding
yeah.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And so again, you just have the ability to produce horses on a larger scale, which also means you have the ability to kind of fine tune your programs to produce what
Mhm.
we would call better horses, right? Because you're not just using whatever's available, you can be a bit more discerning in terms of what you choose to perpetuate. So the breeding programs
It's
you
more,
create,
yeah,
if
yeah.
you're producing more horses, you can then
Right.
go, well, that one's got some, faults. That
Issues.
one's not ideal. This one is
Mhm.
more ideal, so we're gonna breed this one and not that one. And it's basically early
Mhm.
selective breeding. And the larger the pool you have to work with, the more flexibility you have with that. And again, just that prevalence of horses in Macedonian and Thessalian society, it makes sense that again with Macedonia as well, from very early on, like pre-Peloponnesian War period, early like Persian wars, like they're known for being a cavalry force, not
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
infantry force, unlike
Yeah.
sort of other parts of Greece, which are of course more famous for their hoplites and their heavy infantry. So it's the environment, and then the environment creates certain social structures, and those certain social
Mhm.
structures kind of perpetuate the use of cavalry.
Explain quickly how cavalry works in combat. That is, what does it look like when it's moving around a field?
So if we're talking about Greek cavalry, and I guess here we can talk more specifically about Thessaly and
Yeah,
Macedonia
that's
because
what I'm
that's
saying.
where we're
Yeah,
seeing
yeah,
cavalry
yeah.
used kind of the most prevalently.
Hmm.
It's in formations. So of course, I mean, horses are a very adaptable animal once you
Hmm.
get them over their fear of everything. So they were really useful for lots of tasks pertaining to warfare. So for scouting, because of course a horse
Hmm.
can cover more ground, they're faster. And so if you need to see what's coming, sending out mounted scouts is a much quicker way of doing that.
Yeah.
For also like raiding and getting supplies and things like that, for protecting lines when they're, on the march. But when it comes to combat itself, what the Greeks tended to do is use specific formations, and these formations are often attributed to the Thessalians. So how much truth there is in this, it's hard to say. But I mean, it kind of makes sense that the sort of preeminent cavalry power in Greece is kind of pushing the development of a lot of these different types of formations. So kind of the two main ones are a rhomboid, so kind of a diamond shape, and then the wedge, so a triangle. And what's key about all of the formations that were used for cavalry groups, cavalry units, sort of charging into battle, is that they have points to them. They have like a sharp tip. So they're not charging in one kind of long line. Like when you think of it's like what you see in like Lord of the Rings and stuff when you have those great charges, like the Riders of Rohan. They're just like in this really long line charging towards the enemy. That's not how it seemed to work in Greece. They always had these points. And so on there's a few reasons for this. I mean, my interest in these formations and how and why they worked comes back to horse psychology and horse behavior. And so horses, well, although they are prey animals and they are naturally afraid of most everything, just like with any other species of animal, you get different personalities, and you'll get some horses that are more dominant, some horses that are braver, that are less fearful, and whether this is a trait that you're breeding for or just a particular quirk of that animal, this is something that can then be utilized to your advantage on the battlefield. So if you have, let's say you have I don't know, a formation of 400 cavalrymen, a unit of 400 horsemen, and you're riding into battle, the way you're going to kind of put it is you're going to have within that unit of 400 horsemen, some of those horses are going to be braver and bolder and more experienced. So those are the horses that you're going to want to put kind of at the points of your formation, because those horses won't sort of cringe back or shy away from charging into battle because this is what they do. So whether they just are fearless or they've been trained so well that they know that this is their task, you put those horses kind of at the front of a formation, and then the less confident horses or perhaps the slightly more fearful horses will follow, because another thing that drives horses is that they are social animals. Horses are herd animals. This is a naturally occurring thing in the wild. The last thing a horse wants is to ever be by itself. They are driven to be in a group, whether it's a bachelor group of male horses who haven't acquired a family band, or family bands of horses. This is just the way they are. And so as soon as the horses at the front of the formation start charging, then the rest are just going to automatically follow, because they're like, I have to stay with the herd. I have to stay with the group. I'm going. And this can then help them kind of, again, get over their fears and anxieties because they're staying with the group, and the confidence of the horses at the front of the formation will carry on to the horses further back in the formation. And of course, having a point on your formation also makes it easier to break through other formations, right? Having that powerful tip, that powerful point, which can break into kind of a weak spot, in whether it's another cavalry formation or an infantry formation. And then as the rhomboid or as the wedge pushes through, it breaks that hole up more and more because you have the power of all of these horses
Push them
coming from
through.
behind. And the advantage of the rhomboid over the wedge is you have 4 points. So if you have to change the direction of your charge, you can sort of give the command and shift the direction you're going in, and you still have one of those, a group of those bold horses at the front, and you still have a tip. So it's a little more, I suppose, flexible in some ways than the wedge, but also a bit more complex to organize and manage.
Yeah. All right. So, writing, you've spent 2 months. I know you've talked about it on the Russian Mongolian steppe, writing with people. And you've traveled, I know, all over the Mediterranean for your research, physically riding horses when you got to, looking at ponies in museums. How do you build that into your research? I mean, some of it's probably self-evident, but how has this helped you, I guess?
So I get, it's one of the things that is maybe both a bit of a blessing and a curse with my research. I think often as classicists, as ancient historians, whatever you
Mhm.
want to call yourself, um, the the people, the things, the cultures now we're studying, they're gone. I mean,
Right.
yes, Greece still exists. Yes, Rome still exists, but it's not identical to,
Mhm.
the Athens that existed 2,500 years ago, or the Macedonian that existed 2,500 years ago, or the Rome of 2,000 years ago. And the people like we're studying, like Alexander, I mean, he's gone. He's not here. We can't ask him anything. We can't be like, yeah, so what was your issue? Like, what was going on there? So we have to, as an ancient historian, you are relying so heavily on your sources, whether these are your textual sources or sort
Mhm.
of material culture, right? Physical remains, archaeology, things like that. And as anyone who's even sort of dabbled in this knows, there is so much that is gone.
Yeah.
And, like when we talk about Alexander the Great, none of the contemporary histories survive. Like none of the histories that were written while he
Yep.
was conquering everything, like they're gone. So everything we have is written, not even like 20 years after he died, but like we're talking like centuries after he
Yeah.
died.
300 years, I
And
think, Diodorus. Yeah.
yeah, like and obviously and then we have fragments of things and we get
Yeah.
references to things that we don't have anymore that are gone. You're like, oh, what I would give to have that. And with archaeology
Yeah.
and with the material culture, again, it's sort of trying to piece together what's survived, trying to place it in context and all of that. So, a lot of what we do as ancient historians is like this crazy deranged jigsaw puzzle of trying to make sense of it. So
Yep.
the sort of the unexpected bonus I have with my research into ancient horses is that horses are still very much around. I sort of refer to them as like a living artifact, because of course we have loads of different breeds of horses today, and
Mhm.
yeah, we've got more specialization, and we don't use horses actively in combat and stuff anymore. But again, the basic biology, physiology, behavior, biomechanics of a horse today is the same as a horse 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, because a horse is still a horse. And so I can use my knowledge of horses. I've ridden horses almost my entire life since I was a very little girl. I've trained horses. I have my own horses, all these things. And then, as Gianna mentioned, I've been very fortunate, starting with my PhD and then continuing on to travel to many parts of the Mediterranean, other parts of Europe, but also parts of Central Asia like Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan to ride horses, um, sort of the local types of horses, which are not to say that they're identical to what existed in the ancient world. When I ride a horse in modern Greece, it's not, even though it's a Greek breed of horse, it's not, I'm like, yeah, this is Bucephalas. I mean, it's a horse that's suited to this environment, but it can give me these really fascinating insights, um, into how these animals move, how the environment shapes them, how it shapes the way that they're managed and maintained, their kind of cultural significance. Again, that changes over time, but the husbandry practices, especially in Central Asia, you still have these sort of like nomadic groups, these nomadic tribes and families, and the way that they keep their horses. Yes, they've got modern veterinary care, but a lot of it you're watching them and like, yeah, this is like echoes of Herodotus. Just to sit there milking their horses and stuff. So it has the opportunity to give me an insight
Uh-huh.
that is not typically afforded to ancient historians, an insight, a window into the past. But I also have to be very cognizant of these are not the
Right.
people, the Scythians. These are not the ancient Thessalians. These are not, ancient Bedouin or something like that. They're modern people living in a modern world to whom the horse is still really important. And I have to be careful not to impose kind of my
Yeah.
ideals of
Yeah.
kind of what I want them to be on it. I have to not
Yeah.
look for the answers that I'm hoping to find. But rather it's kind of letting the horses sort of tell me their story.
I'm going to switch around a couple of the questions and go ahead since we were talking about sources.
Mhm.
Talk about some of the written sources and, the little bit of visual that you get, archaeology, that kind of thing that you use.
Yeah, so I mean the source, the textual source, the I don't know, the sacred text of studying ancient, ancient Greek or the sort of ancient Mediterranean horsemanship is Xenophon.
Yeah.
So Xenophon's on horsemanship, his Hippocrates. So this is a text that was written in the fourth century BCE. So Xenophon is Athenian. He's an Athenian kind of aristocrat, rich boy,
Yeah.
who, I mean, had a really interesting life because he ends up leaving Athens, kind of in the aftermath of the whole oligarchy Spartan stuff. And he ends up in Sparta. He's on the march of the 10,000 into Asia, all of that. But one of the things that Xenophon most 100% is a horse boy. The guy loves horses. And like, this is apparent. Like, even when you read his non-horsey specific texts, you can see like there are references to horses in there. You're like, this is a guy who likes his horses. He knows horses. So his On Horsemanship, it's not the first horse manual. He makes reference to an earlier text by another Athenian, Simon, of which we only have a couple of fragments, but he says there's a statue of him, so everyone knew who he was. But yeah, so Xenophon's on Horsemanship, it's not so much a training manual as like a kind of what to look for. He's writing to your aristocratic elite, right? To your elites who can afford horses. And so he tells you how to spot a good horse, so what the ideal horse looks like. And this is where we kind of get some phrases, some ideas about horses that are still really prevalent and popular in sort of the vernacular today. So for example, when talking about horses, we'll always say no hoof, no horse. So a hoof is a horse's foot. And if a horse has bad feet, it doesn't matter how nice the rest of the horse is, it's not going to last, right? It's going to break down. So if they've got bad feet, they're not going to stay sound. They're not going to be able to work. And Xenophon says this 2,400-ish years ago, right? He says that a horse is like a house. And if it doesn't have a solid foundation, so in other words, if it doesn't have good feet, then it's going to fall apart, no matter how pretty the rest of it is. So he gives us this breakdown of sort of the ideal horse. He says, don't train it yourself because you're a busy politician, elite Athenian. Send it to the experts. They'll deal with it, which honestly is probably for the best. And then he sort of talks about, again, like how you should keep them. So talking about the stable, sort of how to introduce horses to scary things, and then different exercises you can do with horses to train them. He's talking predominantly about the war horse. So exercises for training them to prepare them for battle and to prepare you for battle. But he does talk about the parade horse as well. He's like, if you want a horse for parades, look for the pretty flashy ones, and here's kind of what you need. And then he talks about equipment. So the arms and armor of the horse and rider for battle. So it's a really cool text. It's lots of fun. It's very specific. There's a lot of jargon in it, which makes translating it pretty entertaining. Because if you don't know horses, you'll be looking at some of these words and be like, oh, what is this? What is he talking about? This doesn't make any sense. And again, in the modern world, like, the horse world has always had its own jargon, has had its own like vernacular that if you don't know what we're talking about must sound really, really weird to overhear. So Xenophon's the big one. His horsemanship. He has another text called On the Cavalry Commander, which is more specifically looking at the duties of the cavalry commander for kind of preparing his troops for war. A little bit of overlap with the horsemanship, but again, it's talking more about doing things like public displays of, cavalry skills. So these mounted displays and processions you would do. And then again, what you need to be aware of when you're out in the field. So those are kind of the two big ones. We do have earlier sources. So from the Hittites, so basically the Bronze Age Anatolia, Bronze Age Turkey, we have a text called the Kikuli text. And I can always forget the exact date, but it's like 13th, 12th century. It's old. It's in cuneiform. So Kikuli was a Mitanni horse master. So the Mitanni came from kind of the Lake Van region, eastern Turkey, Armenia. And they are known for their horses as well. Again, in the Romans' horses and stuff, we hear references to their horses. And so the Kikuli text is more of a, I call it like a CrossFit or like a cross-training manual for horses. So the Hittites didn't fight from horseback, they fought from chariots. And so really what the Kikuli text is it's like a program for selecting appropriate chariot horses for war and then getting them fit. So it's basically telling you how far to run them, when to do it, what to feed them, again, and that's all to get them fit and ready to pull your chariot into war. So those are kind of the big ones. And then horses are just mentioned everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Like comedies, tragedies, legal texts, military texts, farming texts, you name it, there's probably a horse mentioned in it. In terms of horse breeding, our main sources are, there's some Roman sources, so there's Columella and Varro's texts on agriculture, which are for gentlemen, again, writing to the elite farmer, and they talk about horse breeding, again, the ideal horse, and sort of how to manage your stud of horses, your breeding farm of horses. Virgil in his Georgics actually does also talk a little bit in a very poetic way about breeding horses. And then we get kind of a whole series of like veterinary manuals. Again, a lot of them, the early ones are lost. So the earliest is kind of, which I would love to have, is a Hellenistic text by Mago of Carthage, and it comes to influence a lot of the later veterinary texts. And again, that talk about not just horse veterinary care, but veterinary care in more general. But yeah, like Pelagonius, and then Aristotle, because Aristotle writes about everything. Aristotle in his animal texts writes about horses as well. So it is kind of you're having to comb through your sources to look for sort of appropriate, look for relevant passages pertaining to horses, because you will literally find them all over the place. You know, whether it's in the more sort of expected texts, or
Right.
yeah, you know, in a comedy or something like that, where they make some reference to horse behavior or the cost of horses or whatever, and you're like, ah, yeah,
I
that's
can use
useful.
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I could use
Yeah,
that.
there's a lot of weird adjacent stuff we find in places, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. You know, I love
Yeah,
Athenaeus for that because it's like
yeah,
everything under the sun, I swear to God, that has anything to remotely to do with food, you
is
know.
there.
Yeah,
Or like Aelian with his miscellany of animals, or even like Aesop's fables, where the horse
yeah.
is a stand-in for the rich aristocrat who's snooty and aloof and who can lose their fortune and fall down in society. And the donkey is the poor slave being beaten. They're everywhere. They are, and like when I was doing my PhD and I was looking at images of horses as well, because they love a horse in art. And I would go
Yeah.
into museums on my travels and be like, cool, I need to photograph all of the classical horses in here because I was building this typology of horses in the ancient sort of world. And that's when you discover that there's just like thousands of them. Like
They're
they're
everywhere.
literally on everything. Like even where
Yes.
it's like a tombstone, like a stele. And there's the deceased and the da da da, and randomly in the corner, like it's looking in through a window, there's a horse head. You're like, what the why? Why did you have to put that there? Why is that there?
To drive you crazy so that now you have another picture to take, Carol.
Exactly. And there was many a meltdown, an
Yeah.
existential crisis where I questioned all of my choices in many museums around the world. Like, why? I just want to go eat and sit in the sunshine. And there's another like 30
There's a
horses I could
horse.
photograph in this room. And you're like contorting yourself because, like, in museums, there's the parts of the
Oh
piece they
God.
choose to show you. So especially with
Right.
pottery, which of course tends to have imagery on all sides, I'm like contorting myself, like doing some sort of, I don't know, photographic yoga to try and get behind this display case to get a picture of this really cool looking horse without the glare. And like the museum, guards are like, what is she doing? Like, why is she like lying there on the ground trying to get this photograph?
Yeah, been there.
Yeah,
Not for
they
horses, but
literally
for something, Yeah, yeah, exactly. And they're like, looking, what's your problem?
my advice, don't study like the most high status animal in the ancient world because they put them on everything as a status symbol. Pick something way
Yeah.
more obscure. Your life will be
Weasels,
way less
pick
painful.
weasels.
Weasels. Is it a weasel? Is it a cat? Could be
Yeah,
both.
exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a story
Yeah.
about this supposed cat and dog fight on this stele
Mm-hmm.
or, bottom of
Mm-hmm.
stele. It's not a
In
cat.
Athens. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weasel. Anyway, yeah, that's the other thing. Museums sometimes mislabel things. Um,
Yes. Yes.
but
But in their defense,
anyway,
cat and weasel are used interchangeably in the
yes,
sources because
in
they
the
are both used
language.
for
Yeah,
ratting. Yeah.
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 Okay, so anyway, going back to the other, name me a thing or three that drives you batty as a horse expert when you're reading scholarship about horses in combat, horses in
Right.
general.
You want to just hear me scream and
Yes,
rage, and I
yes,
think
yes.
I think
Bring it on,
I
bring
think
it
I've
on.
slowly managed. I am slowly turning the tide on this. God knows I have been going at it since I was a grad student.
Um,
Okay, so the period that we study, right, in the ancient Mediterranean world, there are no stirrups. There are no. We eventually
mhm.
get a proto saddle. We get the so-called Roman saddle. But by and large, most of the time when we're talking about horses being ridden into battle, they are doing so bareback or with just like a cloth or an animal skin underneath them. So stirrups are what we have on modern
Okay.
saddles. I mean,
Yeah.
we have medieval, early medieval, modern saddles. It's where your feet go, right? And stirrups are handy. Okay, they help you
Right.
balance totally, 100%. And so everyone, not everyone, but like so many pieces of scholarship, academic and popular history. You read it and they're talking about, Greek cavalry or Persian cavalry or whatever. And they're like, yes, but they are hindered in their effectiveness because they don't have stirrups. In other words, they're limited in terms of how extensively they can be used on the battlefield because they don't have stirrups. They can't do things like shock combat. They can't do this. They can't do that because they'll all just fall off their horses. That is such bullshit. It is total bullshit. If you are entirely dependent on your stirrups to keep you on your horse, then you have much bigger issues. And people saying that because they were riding bareback, they were less secure on their horses. People might be less comfortable on their horses. Yada 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 yada. Now, 100%, there are horses that are more comfortable to ride bareback than others, and this is all of our ancient horse sources, when they're describing the ideal horse, they describe the horse that's comfortable to ride bareback. They call it the horse with a double back, which does not mean they have two backs. It just means they have a broad back and the
Yeah.
muscle is built up on either side of the spine so that the spine is more recessed and the back kind of lifts up into your butt cheeks so that you're not sitting with the horse's spine jammed up between your butt cheeks. That is not comfortable. It's not a fun horse to ride bareback. Okay. But I mean, I spend a great portion of my time riding without a saddle, especially in the winter when it's really cold and you're feeling kind of lazy and you just jump on bareback. It's just a different way of riding. And for us to always be harping on about the fact that they weren't able to take full advantage of their cavalry because they didn't have saddles and stirrups. I mean, that is very much like a modern bias, a modern privilege, placing our concepts of how you should ride a horse on other cultures. You are able to do absolutely everything without a saddle and without stirrups that you can do with stirrups. It's just a case of what you're used to. Sure, if you've only ever ridden in a saddle with stirrups and someone throws you on a horse bareback and says, okay, like here is your spear, go gallop across this field, hit that target, jump this thing, do that, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
Because it's a different form of balance. It's a different way of doing things. But if this is what you do all the time, it's second nature. In fact, if someone then gave you a saddle and stirrups and said, now do the same thing, you'd be like, I don't like this. This feels very weird and precarious. And it's a different way of sitting on the horse. And it's a different way of using your body. So it's not that having no saddles and stirrups made them less effective or sort of hampered them in any way. It's just different. We say, oh, but they also sit in a chair seat. Well, again, that's because they're riding bareback. And when you're riding bareback, you don't sit with like perfect, what we call equitation, like your perfect little, like
back up and
English hunter jumper rider dressage equitation, because then you're going to bounce, right? Because you don't have anything between you and the horse. You sit in a much more relaxed way that perhaps to us might look sloppy, but to them worked for what they were doing and the types of horses they were riding and stuff like that. So that is the biggest one. Is I am so tired of people saying that these ancient riders who could probably ride circles around all of us were somehow less effective and less adaptable on a battlefield simply because they didn't have stirrups. You don't need, and again, stirrups break. Like, okay, I'm in the middle of battle and my stirrup has broken. Do we call off the battle because I can no longer couch my lance and charge into, like, no. Come on now.
Somebody might kill you. Yeah. So in other words,
Somebody might
folks,
kill you. Like,
stop
wait, no,
that one.
equipment malfunction. So that is my big one. I am so tired of reading about the precarity, the discomfort, the anxiety, whatever you want to call it, that ancient riders must have had simply because they did not know of saddles and stirrups. Yeah, that's the big one. Number two, the size of the horses. Again, this is slowly changing. There's been, it's something that I, again, have been screaming at until I'm blue in the face and saying over and over and over again in publications and presentations and stuff like that. And thankfully, there's also been a lot of work done into the medieval horse. So there was a project that, it was like a nationally funded project at the University of Exeter called the War Horse Project, which was looking at skeletal remains and the sort of material culture, so the armor and stuff like that for horses and kind of, I think it was like kind of high medieval Europe, trying to, again, determine size. And shockingly, whether we're talking about the ancient world, whether we're talking about the medieval world, the horses weren't big, right? They're not riding into battle on a Budweiser Clydesdale. I mean, a Hollywood, they're definitely not riding into battle
A
on a Frisian.
Frisian
Right?
stallion like they put Alexander on in the movie.
Like
Yeah.
let's take this hairy. I mean, they're beautiful. Frisians are
Right.
beautiful. I
But
somehow ended up with a horse that's like quarter Frisian, which my husband still laughs about because I'm always going off about the Frisians in Hollywood.
right.
But no, like those horses didn't exist. Right? We call like these heavier horses, these draft horses, tall horses, big horses, did not exist in the ancient medieval world. They are a very relatively modern development because again, the environment is not suited to maintaining large horses. Big horses, having owned really big horses, they are a lot more expensive to keep. They need more food. They break easier. They're more prone to
Oh,
injury. Their
interesting.
feet are harder to trim. I mean, just everything
Mm.
about a large horse is more impractical than having a small horse. So when we look at the horses of the ancient world and the horses of the medieval world of medieval Europe and sort of the medieval Near East or Middle East and medieval Central Asia, they're what we call pony size. So we measure a horse in hands, which is the width of your palm. So it's 4 inches. You measure them from standing on level ground. You measure them from the bottom of their hoof to their wither, which is the big bulge at the base of their neck. So a pony is anything 14.2 hands and under. Again, that's a modern designation because we've got this whole obsession with bigger is better now, and that
Right,
small
right.
horses are for kids and big horses are for adults. Ridiculous. But all horses in the ancient world were small. So when you were looking at horses in art, and the one that always gets me is the Parthenon frieze, the hundreds
Yeah.
of, over 200 beautifully executed horses on the Parthenon frieze. And for the longest time, people would say they weren't really that small. They made them small to exaggerate the human form. And you're like, then why are the bulls life size? Why are the other animals on the Parthenon frieze life
Yeah.
size? And why, for the love of Zeus, would you take the most high value animal in your society and make it smaller
Yeah.
to exaggerate the human form? No, they
Right.
are just that size.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, this didn't make them useless because a horse's power, a horse's weight carrying ability and endurance ability, all of these things that would matter on the battlefield, it's not based on their size. A tall, massive horse isn't necessarily better for battle than a small, compact horse. The small, compact horse is the one you want because that weight carrying ability comes from the proportions of their body, not how big they are. And again, those smaller horses, they're not going to get tired as quickly. They are more adaptable, they're more maneuverable. So ancient horses were small, and that wasn't a bad thing because the one downside I will concede to in not having stirrups is getting on the horse. Okay,
Yes.
because you
Yeah.
have to be able to get on. And if you have a giant horse, if you have like an 18-hand horse, jumping on that sucker from the ground, there are people who can do it, who have springs for feet. That is not the majority of us, especially not in armor. So a small horse you can jump on from the ground. And Xenophon even gives us tips and tricks on how to do this using your spear as like a little pole vaulting stick. Or you can take my approach, which is the floppy beached whale, where you basically just belly flop onto the horse's back and then wiggle your legs
Fill up.
over.
Yeah.
On like a large, 14-2, like you're even like a 15-hand horse, right? A small horse,
Yeah.
totally doable. When
Yeah.
they're giant, it's a lot harder. And again, you can't say, please stop the battle. I need someone to bring me a mounting block or give me a boost up onto my horse. Right?
Right.
You have to
I
be able to get
follow.
on by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So no big horses in the ancient world. Just get that Alexander the Great, small man, small horse, big empire. Like that's what I wanted to call my master's thesis. There was nothing wrong with that. Okay, we didn't need giant horses. Giant horses, I love them, but they're kind of overrated. I'm going to get so much hate mail now. But seriously, go for a nice mid-size horse.
Mid-size. You.
Go for a mid-size. They're sporty, they're compact, they're sturdy. Great. And when it's minus 40 in the middle of the winter and you're getting off, your feet aren't going to be screaming in pain when you eventually hit the ground because they've gone numb and it's a long way down.
Yeah.
So there we go. Advice from Dr. Willekes. So yeah, that's the second one.
Got any
Oh
other?
God, what would a third?
You used to yell about people. I remember saying you can't charge, horses won't charge a line of spears.
Yeah, so I mean, and I actually believed that for a long time. I mean, this is something my research has also made me consciously and subconsciously myth bust a lot of my own
Mhm.
preconceived notions. I mean,
Yeah.
especially, being able to ride horses in all sorts of different environments and
Mhm.
all sorts of different types of horses. The number of times I've been sitting on a horse somewhere in the world going, wow, I didn't think horses could actually do that, but they can.
They can,
Huh.
yeah.
Which is always sucks for
Yeah.
my horses when I get home and I'm like, oh, no, no, princess. No, no. No, 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 no. You can do
I know
this.
you can do that, yes.
I know you can do this. But yeah, it's the idea of horses charging into infantry. I mean, it's not an ideal.
Mhm.
The better option is always to sort of have them be at the wings or coming at the sides of
Mhm.
formations. But again, thinking of these sort of rhomboid and wedge formations and horse behavior and horse personalities and sort of more dominant aggressive horses versus more submissive horses, you can do it. And this was an experiment that Graham and Waldemar, much to his terror, dismay, I'm not sure, and I
Yeah, he's
did
yeah,
when
afraid
Graham
of
and I were
horses.
PhD students, the sort of playing around a bit with the Battle of Gaugamela, and obviously we didn't have scythe chariots, but we had me on horseback, and we had reproductions of sarissas, and we did have ethics forms. We did have ethics approval for this, um, and sort of riding my wonderful late horse Bert, who was not a particularly bold or brave horse. He's kind of bottom of the pecking order, kind of mid range in terms of his braveness. And yeah, what I learned
To get a
is
friend. Yeah.
I mean, getting a friend totally helps. Oh, you've got a friend.
Yes, I have a friend. Yeah.
Oh, you have a friend, but
She's
also getting a friend did help Bert. But I have my Velociraptor puppy is back down here.
yeah.
Um, if Bert could get his head into a formation, so if like we're riding towards a formation of infantry, it's almost like he would sense the weak spot, which was always
Mm.
Waldemar, because he was afraid of horses. This is my graduate supervisor who, convinced me to stay
Waldemar
and do my
Heckel.
PhD with him.
Yeah.
Waldemar
So
Heckel,
like
who
the big military
yeah,
historian on Alexander is
uh,
afraid of horses.
afraid
I
of
love it. Yeah. And
afraid
he's
of
no
horses.
small guy either. Valdemar's what,
You know,
6'2" or something? I mean, he's
yeah,
big.
he's not a small human. I did get him on a horse a couple times, which was great. It was
Cool.
like grad student taking revenge. But yeah, we were doing this experiment, and he would sort of shrink away every time we started coming towards him, and so he'd make a gap in the line, and Bert would just through it. You're just like steamroll through. And again, once we're in there, a Bert was a bit taller than your ancient horse would have been. But like once I'm in there, like my kneecaps are just like hitting people in the shoulders. And I just kept
Mm.
apologizing. I'm like, sorry, 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 sorry. But even just at a walk or a trot, that's starting to like spin them out of formation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I found that was really interesting with the Sarissa phalanx, anyways, is that Bert was far more comfortable coming at them head on than coming at them from the side. Because from the side, with the Sarissas, in formation, it looks more like a wall. So Bert was thinking,
Mm.
I'm not going to fit through that. Whereas coming at it from sort of the front, he would see gaps and be like, oh yeah, I can go in there. So yeah, that was really neat. And so made us certainly rethink, battles
Mhm.
like Chaeronea, where Alexander,
Right. Yeah.
leads the companion cavalry against the Theban sacred band. Yeah. But I guess
Yeah.
the other thing, more pop culture related, that always
Mhm.
drives me nuts is whenever you're watching like a movie or a series and they have horses, especially cavalry, horses are always whinnying. Like they're always making noise. Like they're always whinnying or snorting or
Yeah.
bickering or whatever. And while horses do make a wide range of noises, they are prey animals. So they communicate predominantly through body language, right? It's
Yeah.
only when, in certain circumstances where a horse will whinny or will call out. Most of the time, you're not like, oh, yes, I'm riding this horse into battle and it's just going to start screaming. Like, no. So that's the other one. It's like they're always like piping these horse sounds in. Like horses aren't actually that noisy because
Easy.
then
Yeah.
it'd be really easy for their prey to find them or for their predators to find them. So that's another one that's always weird. Like, just all these like little idiosyncratic things. It's like,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So, moving on, I'll come back to my that other story about. Well, let's go there. You told me this, and I just thought it was hysterical. So you are like the person on horses, and at one point they actually. So when we submit a paper, people don't just automatically accept it. They send it out to people called readers, and usually two of them, sometimes three of them, and then they read them and they say, Oh, this is great, publish it, which if you ever get a letter like that, save it because you're going to get one in your entire career. The rest of these more often revise and resubmit, and here's some things you need to address. So what happened to you with one of these?
But I had, yeah, it was an article or a chapter for something that was, yeah, going through blind peer review. So, like with blind peer review, the author's name is obviously removed from the piece, and then the review editors contact people who are specialists in that area and say, hey, would you review this article or review this chapter for a forthcoming publication? Um, so yes, I was sent one of my own pieces. It was something I submitted, and I got this request being like, "Hey, will you peer review this? Because you're the horse person." I'm like, "I'd love to, but I'm the author, or I'm one of the authors, so I definitely can't peer
Yeah,
review it."
I just think that's so funny.
Yeah, because there
So
are. I mean, it's a growing field. We call ourselves horse historians. It's
I
great,
like that.
horse
Okay.
historians.
We're
Um,
stories.
and and there is a growing number of us around the world. There's a few of us sort of working in the ancient world now.
Mhm.
But yeah, kind of a lot of different historical disciplines have sort of got their own horse story, and
Yeah.
we all band together. Um, and so I'm no longer the only one. There are other people as animal studies and animal history,
Yeah.
especially in the classical world, becomes
Getting better.
kind of a more prevalent topic, which is great.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
really glad to see
but
that there's finally getting
but
to be some work on it. So,
yes, but yeah,
someday I
definitely
will.
still the
I,
horse
I
girl.
I keep threatening that whenever I retire, I'm really going to dive into cats, and I'm going to become the cat
Yes,
specialist for how were
yes,
cats
yes, yes,
used, and yeah, because
yes.
I
I
don't
gave a
believe that
conference
cats are
paper.
ignored. Anyway, all right.
No,
Well, moving on.
yeah.
So, talk some about your current project and Bucephalus or Boukephalas, however you want to say his name.
Boukephalas.
And yes, one of the more famous horses from the ancient world.
Yeah, he is the famous horse. It's like every horse historian knows him. It doesn't matter if
Right.
you're doing like early modern, Arabic. Everyone knows Bucephalus. Because really, so my current project, uh, that I am frantically working on because the manuscript is due at the end of the summer, is a book on Alexander and Bucephalus. So looking at the role that Bucephalus plays in kind of the legend, the heroization of Alexander from
Yeah.
antiquity to sort of the early
Yeah.
modern period.
Yeah.
And it's been a blast. I mean, it's I've been saying for years and years and years. I mean, since like the Salt Lake City conference back in, I don't know, was it 2013, something like that.
2013,
That
2014. Yeah.
yeah, something like that. I'm like, oh yeah. Because I gave a talk on Bucephalus. I'm like, I'm gonna write an article on Bucephalus. Gonna do it. But other things just kept coming up, other
Yeah.
publications, whatever. Which is not a terrible problem to have, but it meant that Bucephalus kept getting shunted to the side,
It's
and
like
I would
my
give
book
another
on Hip
conference
I Stand.
paper.
It's always
Yeah,
coming. It's never here. So
there.
yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, kept kind of and so a couple of years ago, I kind of like, no, I got to go back to Bucephalus. So I did a few conference papers on him, and one of them, a colleague in Egyptology, was like, well, you could just make it a book. Like, you got enough to say the reception of Bucephalus. He's prevalent enough in loads of places that you could totally make it a book. And it just so happened that an editor had reached out to me, asking if I had anything I wanted to write on horses, and I was like,
Cool.
boy, howdy do I get ready for a Bucephalus book. And everyone's very excited because,
Awesome.
like,
Yeah,
again, people know who
I am.
Bucephalus is.
Mhm.
He is like the historical horse, and he creates this whole legacy for historical
Mhm.
horses. Um, and so it's cool to finally be able to write about him. It is taking me down some wacky rabbit holes, though. Let me tell you, like I knew when I got to medieval Bucephalus, it was going to be a trip. Because, like, spoiler alert, he turns into a unicorn with a peacock tail and an ox head.
I remembered the what was it the he's got not nails, things and other stuff in one
I mean,
version.
he's got
But I've not
normal.
heard about the peacock tail, although I would love
Yeah.
that.
Let me see if I can. I actually have the manuscript that has
Okay.
the most famous versions of him open right now. It's in the National Library of France. But yeah. So and it's even
That's
described
awesome.
like in the medieval sources. He is described as having the ox head and the peacock tail and just like all the things.
I love it.
And so the ox head, I mean, comes from his name, which
Right.
Bucephalus means ox head. So eventually they just like take it
Literally.
literally for whatever reason. And actually, the section of the book I'm working on right now is arguing why he gets the unicorn and peacock elements, which I think is has to do with Christianization
Hmm.
of Alexander. So yeah, that's what I'm working on now. So sort of started by looking at heroes in Greek myth and how they have their special horses, and that this is kind of part of Alexander and Bucephalas' story. And then yeah, the crazy rabbit holes. He becomes a man eater in the Alexander
Yeah.
romance. So the
Yeah.
Alexander
Yeah.
romance, if you haven't read it, read it. It's amazing.
It's so much fun.
Richard Stoneman, who was the kind of the primary scholar on it. I mean, he sadly passed away a couple of
Just
weeks
a month
ago.
or two. Yeah, just maybe a month.
Yeah, not
Not
that
long.
long ago. But it's like this probably Hellenistic to start with. Um, Version of Alexander, where Alexander's story, where you have what you can see like are factual elements of Alexander, from like the Alexander histories, but then you get these wacky things where like he goes deep sea diving
Yeah.
and goes into space, and
The
um,
eagles carrying him
yeah,
up in the basket. It's
eagles
great.
carried him away. Yes. Um, and so in the Alexander romance, Bucephalus, the taming of Bucephalus, is really important sort of element of Alexander's life. Bucephalus becomes a man eater who's like caged in the center of Pella, and Philip feeds his prisoners to him, which yeah, it's just like, oh, okay, that's a choice. Ooh, so I can show you this one. This is a different manuscript. I have a reason to share my screen now. So this
Yeah.
is an old French Alexander romance from the 1400s, I think. What does it say? It's the late 1300s, early 1400s, in the Bodleian Library. And so we have there. So you can see here's Bucephalus in his cage as a
With
unicorn,
the
surrounded by
bones.
are human bones. I'm like, that's great. That's amazing. Yes, and then we've just also got randomly dragons over here as well, because why wouldn't you? Because this is like the early life of Alexander. Yeah, so then we have young Alexander, breaking breaking Bucephalus out of his cage, and then they become besties, and it's great.
I
But
love it.
I have to find a good version of Peacock Bucephalus. Where are you? Where are you? Because it is like it's actually like the image that I don't know sent me down this whole rabbit hole, because it was like, what on earth is
Is
this?
that
Someone had One of my friends had just found a picture like unattributed on Pinterest or something,
right, right, right. Yeah.
and
And you
yeah,
have to
it
go
was like,
run where it is. What is it? What
what?
is it? What is it?
And sent it, and I saw it, and I'm like, that has to be Bucephalus. Like, I can't think of what other animal that would be. Um, and yes, it was definitely Bucephalus from this. Here we go. From this French manuscript. Oh, don't do this to me. Don't tell me you can't be reached. You can be reached, and you will open.
Scold it. That will work.
There we go. So if we just zoom in a little bit, and then I'll share my screen again. I realize I'm just like muttering into my hand right now, but this is kind of like what I've been doing for the last few weeks, is just lost in trying to figure out Bucephalus. Um, okay.
I think the afterlife of Bucephalus will be as interesting in some ways as the actual
Yes. In a
history
way,
of him.
I'm having the most fun with the afterlife of Bucephalus. So yeah, there he is. He is got his peacock tail,
Oh my
and he's got a
gosh.
unicorn horn, and his chevron, his face armor is specially designed so that you can still see his unicorn horn. It's amazing, and he's also the only horse that gets to wear armor.
Okay.
So
I just
yeah,
like the
yeah, and
tail.
his head is, I know, the
It's
peacock
just,
tail is,
I want a horse with a peacock tail. That's like set for me. A lot of folks don't know I love peacocks, and so I have peacocks all over my house, and that's just ideal. I love it. It's great.
yeah, yeah, it's great, it's fantastic. But yeah, this particular manuscript, and it's based on think it's based on Alexander de Paris' version. Because again, we get all of these interpretations of
Right.
Alexander in the medieval period that are just, yeah, just wild. So that's been a lot of fun to fall into. Like I learned that Degas, the famous artist,
Yeah.
famous for his
Yeah.
ballerinas, he has a Bucephalus, a taming of Bucephalus painting.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, it's
Interesting. Yeah.
just everywhere. And
Yeah.
then,
I
my
just saw
favorite
a
is
bunch of his work and I was at the Smithsonian in Washington and saw all the pretty little Degas
yeah,
ballerinas. So I'll have to look for
yeah, and
that.
there's in Edinburgh outside of like one of the major civic buildings. Oh, I think the city chambers. There's a statue of Alexander and Bucephalus from
Okay.
like the
He's
1800s.
everywhere.
Just
He's
he's
everywhere.
everywhere, and it's always with Bucephalus.
So
Um,
tell folks the story of how Alexander got it, because a lot of people they may have heard of him, but they haven't heard this story, which is so teenage boy.
it's so like Alexander is like the OG horse girl, really, because
Yeah.
now we
Oh,
say it's the
yes.
horse
He
girl that like
absolutely is.
tames the,
Yeah. Yeah.
tames the untamable, tames the
Like the kid
untamable
from,
horse.
I've often wondered too if the whole Black Stallion series was
It
inspired
is
by.
100%.
Is it? Okay.
100%
Yeah, I
is.
am
Yep.
not
The kid's
surprised.
name is the kid's name is Alec.
Alex, yeah.
Um, and in the movie version of Walter Farley's Black Stallion, so the movie with like Mickey Rooney and stuff, um, at the start of the movie when they're on their doomed ship, spoiler alert, the ship sinks. Alec's dad dies, and Alec and this untamable horse make it to an abandoned island, and they get a magic relationship. But his dad tells him the story of the taming of Bucephalus, which is probably where I first heard it,
Hmm.
back as a young horse girl watching this movie. Okay, so Alexander is, I don't know, an adolescent. He's a young, maybe 12, 13. We don't know
Yeah,
exactly how old he
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Um, and his dad, so King Philip II of Macedonia, needs some more horses, and so there's a big horse fair happening in the capital, or Pella. And there's this one horse that's brought in, and he is stupid expensive. I mean, the sources differ. Some say he costs 1 talent. Some say he costs 13 talents. Either way, 1 talent is still an obscene amount of money to spend for a horse. Uh, it's so we're talking like this is a high priced horse. Um, but there's an issue in that his horse comes in and he's all snorty and prancy and expensive, but no one can ride him. Every person who tries to get on him, like all of Philip's trainers and stuff like that, all the best horsemen in his kingdom, they can't get on or they can't stay on. They all get thrown. And so Philip basically accuses the seller, Philonicus, of trying to swindle him or kill him or God knows. So like get this useless horse out of here. And Alexander is there and he pipes up as teenage boys do, I guess, especially when you have a fraught relationship with your dad. And
Yeah.
basically says his dad's being an idiot because he's getting rid of the best horse by far at the sale. And
He knows
Philip is like,
best. Just,
yeah, I know best. Philip's basically like, shut up, boy. Are you saying you know better than all of these
yeah.
way more experienced men? And Alexander shockingly is like, yeah, I do, because he's Alexander. And
Yeah.
so they then have this thing where Philip's like, okay, like, so what? What if you can't do it? Then what? And says, well, Alexander says, I'll buy the horse, which even though he is a prince, there's no way he can't, his allowance would not allow him to buy this horse. So basically, this agreement is set that if Alexander can ride the horse, then Philip will buy the horse for Alexander. If Alexander can't buy the horse, he will be doing chores for the rest of his life. I don't know how they were going to figure it out.
Yeah.
So Alexander goes, and this is all in Plutarch's, the most famous version of this is in Plutarch's Life of Alexander. And so Alexander goes into the ring, and basically what he's noticed is that this horse is not savage. He's not a man eater, despite what he becomes. He's not inherently violent or unrideable. He's scared. He is afraid of his shadow, which again sounds ludicrous, but can confirm horses are often afraid of their own shadows. They like see it and they panic. They're like, ah, and then they jump away from themselves. So basically, what's going on with Bucephalus in sort of the version Plutarch gives us is that he's in this high pressure situation, right? He's in, an arena or he's in a field and he's surrounded by people and strange horses and noise and, the stress, and horses are really good at picking up on our stresses and anxieties as well. They kind of feed off them. So he's kind of panicking, but because he's being contained and he's got this big bit in his mouth and all this, he can't do what his instinct is telling him to do, which is run away. He is stuck. And so when a horse can't flee, they fight. That's what Bucephalus is doing. He is fighting not because he is savage, but because he is terrified. So Alexander goes down. He's noticed this, that the horse is afraid. And so he turns him so that he's facing the sun, so he can't see his shadow anymore. He like takes his cloak off and stuff, so there's nothing flappy and scary. He jumps on. And then what he does is really important, because he doesn't jump on and try and make Bucephalus stand there, because then he would just keep exploding. He just lets him run, which is what Bucephalus has wanted to do all along. And he gets on, he turns him into the sun, and he just lets him run and run and run and run until he basically runs out his panic and realizes nothing's going to eat him, nothing's going to beat him, nothing's going to kill him. And you can almost sense that he just goes like, oh. And then Alexander's like, okay, you're fine now. And he gives him a pat and he turns him around so he can see his shadow again. But by now, Bucephalus has like gotten rid of all of that adrenaline, that the world is ending, I'm going to die, panic. And he rides him back to the arena, or to where the crowds are. And Philip is all like, my son, you need a kingdom bigger than Macedonia, because it's not going to be big enough for you. And so it becomes this like apocryphal, almost like prophetic thing, that he tames the sort of untamable horse. And then like in the Alexander romances, man-eater eating Bucephalus comes with a prophecy that whoever can ride this horse like through the center of Pella will be like emperor of the world. So yeah, it's like it's one little passage in Plutarch, but it's, when you read it, and the more you read it, especially if you sort of know horses and horse behavior, and recognize that, you know, Alexander did do really impressive things with his cavalry and sort of changed the face of sort of cavalry combat a little bit, then it all kind of starts to make sense that, you know, he is a horseman. They have to read this passage. It's from one of the medieval romances, I think from the 1400s, and it is like, this is the translation from the original French. And yeah, so this is Alexander. He's heard this terrifying noise, right? This bellow, and he's like, "Oh my God, what is that?" And no one will tell him. Like Aristotle won't tell him, because Aristotle's like, "If I tell you, you're going to want to go and do it, because no one can do it, and then you'll die, and that'll be bad." So I think he eventually gets Hephaestion to tell him,
Oh, okay.
like, what is that? Yeah. And so he goes to the stone enclosure where the horse was kept and bade that it be unlocked. Then he opened the door. The moment he saw the horse, he was filled with joy. He thought him astonishingly handsome, and likewise, when Bucephalus set eyes on Alexander, he bowed before him in the most amazing manner, just as if Alexander were his master and he'd known him and been riding him since the beginning of time. The horse was as placid as a maid. It's like every single movie where there's like the girl and she's told, "Oh, you can't ride that Mustang. That Mustang is going to kill people." Da 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 da. She's like, "I'm
Yeah.
traumatized just like that Mustang." And like they find each other in a dark and stormy night, and look what I can do. Like it's seriously every single like 1990s onwards
That's
trope
awesome.
about
Yeah.
the girl who goes out to the countryside and finds this magic, the teenage girl who gets this magic union with this savage horse that's about to be killed or sent to off
Right.
or whatever, because no one can approach it. Like that's originally, it's Alexander and Bucephalus,
Yeah. I
the
love it.
OG horse girl. I'm telling you.
Yeah. This is the same guy though who threatened to kill an entire tribe when they stole
Yeah,
his
he did.
horse.
He did. Yeah, when he was
And
in,
he probably would have too. I mean,
he
you
would
know,
have.
it's
I
like,
mean,
bring me my
he's, you know,
horse.
somewhere probably in like Afghanistan area. It varies depending on the sources, but basically he's, yeah, marching kind of through the Afghan area, and yeah, hill tribes steal a bunch of the horses, including Bucephalus, who, like, by this point in time is not a young horse. Like Alexander's probably
Yeah.
not riding him into battle anymore.
Yeah.
But this horse he loves this horse. And so yeah, they steal him, and he's like, "I will end you. I will burn all of your villages to the ground. I will kill every last one of you. Give me my pony back." And they do. Toot sweet. Like, here's your pony.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like, well, he's done it to other people. Yeah. So I love it.
and then when Bucephalus dies in India, probably of old age, likely of old age or
Mhm.
illness or injury, Alexander gives him a funeral and he names a city after him, Boukephalia. So, um, yeah,
Not after any other people, just his dog and his horse, which I
yeah,
find, yeah, this
yeah.
is
His
an
dog and his
animal guy.
horse. Like,
Yeah, this is an animal
you
guy.
know, a man. I struggle with Alexander sometimes. I've
I
come to the
know.
conclusion that I will never escape him. There are lots of things about Alexander that are like, you are not a great human being, but he loved his animals. I mean, the fact
Yeah.
that he named a city after his horse and his dog. It's like, and it's like a
Weirdly,
little. glimmer of humanity in you.
Yeah. Weirdly, that's something I've heard people try to say he was a narcissist and other, and weirdly, that is one thing that speaks very much against it.
Yeah.
That is never a characteristic of them. They do not love animals. The fact that he did all of that for a horse tells me, nope, he's not a narcissist. He may have many other things wrong with him, but it's not
He
that.
is far from perfect. Well, and again, too, like I think when because it's Alexander or it's Alexander's army, they're the ones who discover that peacocks actually come from India. Peacocks had always, when peacocks arrive in the Greek world, kind of the 6th, 5th century BCE,
Yeah,
it's assumed that they come from Persia. And I mean, they got to the
right,
Greek
right.
world via Persia, so it was like, oh, these are Persian bird. And then um, when Alexander gets to, northern India, basically gets like the Punjab region and kind of the northern part of India, and they see wild peacocks. He's like, ah, that's where they come from. And apparently he was like, just so, I've been studying peacocks.
Yeah.
He was so enamored of how beautiful they were that he forbade his men from killing them and eating them, hunting them. So,
So,
yeah.
like I said, very interesting guy. All right, so we need to probably wrap this up. We've
Yeah,
for a while,
yeah.
but that's fun. So anything else that after all this study you maybe have changed your mind about with him, with the horse or an Alexander, either one, or any other famous horses that have caught your eye that um, you want to make people aware of?
I think what I've learned kind of more than anything, as I've said, my own preconceptions have been challenged quite a lot.
Hmm.
And I mean, certainly it's done a lot for I mean, I changed my riding abilities in some pretty spectacular ways. And I swing swords and shoot bows and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I have done a department Zoom meeting on horseback. I was on a horse training for a video shoot thing that we were doing, and I was like the
I
first
know there's
department.
video. There's video of you
Yeah,
out there, so send me
there's
some and I'll put
photos.
it in the show show
There's
notes. Yeah.
photos of it.
Yes, there are
And
many.
I was on Bert in the Roman saddle with my earbuds in because I was in a department meeting. And I had worn my department chair. I'm like, just so you know, like I am probably going to be on a horse during this meeting. It was still like during COVID times when everything was online. But it was like I was jumping fake bodies and throwing spears at like targets at the same time with like smoke machines going off. And then every so often, like, oh, I have a comment. So I'd have to like stop and like pull my phone out and turn the camera on. And I've got this ridiculous pom pom on my helmet. It's like, hi, I've got a comment. I'm on my horse still. My department, bless them, they are very understanding.
I'm
I'm
sure
very,
they're
very
amused.
lucky.
Yeah.
Very lucky with my department. They don't usually bat an eyelash at like things that I'm doing.
Is Carolyn being
Um,
Carolyn?
being Carolyn again. Um, but aside from things like that, I think, and I suppose this doesn't just apply to studying horses in the ancient world. I think it applies to studying the ancient world or studying other cultures in general. So often because we're so guided by our own experiences and our own biases, to be quite frank,
Yeah.
it's easy to look at something. In my case, to look at an ancient image of a horse and rider or to read an account of something and say that's dumb or that's wrong, that's not how you're supposed to do that. um, when what I've learned to do is instead of saying that's dumb, that's wrong, that's not how you're supposed to do that, is instead go, but why are they doing it like that? Because it's not like it's a one-off, especially when you see trends and patterns and things being done consistently. To be like, okay, why? Why are they riding like that? Or like, why are they using equipment like that? It's certainly stuff that I would never put on my own horse, but I also don't have to actually ride my horse into battle and to depend on communication to not die, and obedience and things like that. So I think, yeah, that's kind of the biggest takeaway and the biggest thing that I have to keep reminding myself about is just because something looks wrong or unfamiliar or backwards or strange to me based on my own knowledge and my own upbringing and my own training as a horse person, that doesn't mean that it's actually wrong. It could be for them, it's entirely right. And the way that we do it would be quite wrong. So yeah, kind of taking off those blinders or taking off that
Yeah.
bias, and instead of just automatically having that gut reaction of bad, wrong, what's wrong with them? Bad riders, can't do it, useless. Going, no, no, there has to be a reason why they're doing it like this. So let's try
Mhm.
and figure out what that reason is. And often the reason is actually like quite in your face, simple and straightforward once you actually play around with it a little bit. So, and like I said, I don't think that applies just to horses. I think that applies in general when we're thinking about the ancient world, is
Yeah.
just because something is different, that doesn't mean we
Which
should be
seems
dismissive of it.
unlikely. Yeah.
Seems
Yeah.
unlikely. Sometimes it's worth just digging in there a bit further and trying to
Yeah.
find the truth in the reality and the logic or rationale behind
Right.
what they're doing.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Don't bring your own biases in. That's,
Yeah.
it's something I'm always telling students. Um, See what the sources are telling you, and you might get surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
figure out why they may be saying that. Look beyond just the
yeah.
text and look to the broader context of the environment, of the people, the place, the things,
Mhm.
and you might get a better understanding. But I think that's the hardest thing we do as ancient historians is
Yeah.
having to let go of our biases because a lot
Oh,
of what
yeah.
we encounter is intensely uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
And so we'd be like, oh, yeah, it definitely wouldn't fly today for many reasons, but that doesn't mean we can ignore it. We still have to understand why it happened.
Right. Yeah. Just because you don't like it or you don't agree with it doesn't mean you can't understand it. Those are
Yeah,
not the same thing. And I
yeah.
think
And you
sometimes
can't
people
just make it go
conflate.
away.
Right.
You can't just be
Yeah.
like, doesn't
Yeah.
exist. Like,
Yeah.
like horses
Yeah.
died in war. It
Right.
sucks. It's
Yeah.
shitty, but that doesn't mean that, I guess, yeah, that's the last thing is people often presume that, I mean, all the way up into like World War I, when we were still actively using horses in battle, that war horses and supply horses and mules and donkeys were just seen as objects or tools. But we know that that's not the case. And we know certainly from like World War I, we have letters. Jane Flynn has written about this. We have the letters that soldiers wrote home about the animals they were taking care of and how like their mental health was like tied to the well-being of these animals. And when these animals were in pain and when they were suffering and when they died, like it gutted the soldiers. It wasn't just, oh, I'll just go get another horse or I'll go get another mule. Like it was like heart wrenching because these were their partners. And well, we may not have that degree of first hand evidence from the classical world. I mean, I always tell people this. I'm like, if I ride a horse into war, asking it to do something that is completely contrary to its evolutionary nature, that animal has to trust me implicitly. I can't force a horse to do it. You can't force a horse to do anything it doesn't want to do. And if I have to beat a horse and force a horse to make it go into battle, that is not going to go well because the first chance that that horse gets, it's going to throw me, it's going to ditch me, it's not going to try and take care of me. We're not going to trust each other. And so, I mean, Bucephalas is obviously kind of an extreme example of this in terms of how emotionally attached Alexander was to this horse and how upset he gets when his horse is taken from him. But even putting that in a more moderate context, cavalrymen had to have a relationship with their horses.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
aren't just jumping up on a random horse and be like, "Today
Yeah.
I'm driving you
Yeah.
to battle." And
Yeah.
and no doubt they were gutted. They were sad. They were distraught. They were upset when their horses were injured or died because, I mean, not only have they put loads of time and effort and money into training those horses, war horses are an expensive commodity. They're an expensive thing to own and produce. Like this is who you spend all of your time with. And so like it's your partner, it's your battlefield buddy, it's your, you know,
Yeah.
piece of sanity in the madness of warfare. So I think that too, it's hard to think about it, but just because we know that these horses died and got injured and such in battle doesn't mean that their people didn't care about them. I think they implicitly had to care
Right.
about
Yeah.
them, or
Right.
this whole wacky ass idea of ride a prey animal to war never would have worked.
Let's go jump on an antelope and ride it into combat. That's going to
Woo!
go well.
I mean,
Oh, okay.
allegedly the Swedish did once try war moose. I don't know how well
Did
that
they
went.
really? Oh my
I've
gosh,
heard
that's
this.
gotta
I don't know
be.
how true it is, but I have heard
I've
rumors
seen
of
a
moose
few pictures
cavalry.
of people riding a moose, and I'm like going, you
I
can
have
do
a
that.
friend
I'm gonna stay
who's
away.
I have a friend who's like great grandfather or something. There's a
Oh,
photograph of
moose.
him driving a moose sled up in like northern Alberta or
That's a
something like
big
that, or maybe
animal.
Norway. I don't know, but there is a photo somewhere of him driving a
Yeah,
moose.
that's a
Yeah.
big thing. All right. Well, before we leave, do you want to talk any about your own ponies? Craterus or any of
Yes.
the others. So,
Yeah,
and
so
and
we
then
have
we
we
will
have
conclude with fun stories of real horses.
so yes, we have two horses. I feel like I should
Show them
pull up
off.
some
Yes.
pictures.
And I have to add, while
So
she's looking for them, she named her horse after one of my favorite guys. So I may
yeah.
be biased too.
So I have a 3-year-old. He'll be 3 in July. 3-year-old. He'll be 3 on July 3rd. My horse Craterus.
Mhm.
Um, And so he's an odd mishmash of sort of Irish cob colored horse type and then like a Frisian warm blood sport horse. Just all the he's pretty, he's
He's
cool.
pretty.
I got him when he was 6 months old. So when he was a wee little baby, and now I've just started sitting on him for the very first time. So yes, we have Craterus, who is an absolute clown. Like I describe him as being a golden retriever stuck in a horse's body. So here he is. This was like late winter, so he is super fluffy um, in this photo. And
Yeah,
the
she lives in
the
the
first
cold
bean,
north.
I do. I live in Alberta. Uh, so here we go. Here he is being ridden by Minerva the cat out in his field,
He's a
and
pretty boy.
the cat just jumps on him, and he doesn't care. It's
Yeah.
great. And then so we've had Craterus for 2.5 years. It's pretty cool. Like I've never had a horse quite as young as him. Like I've Percy was a couple years old when I started working with him. So Craterus is the first like really, really young horse that I've kind of been doing stuff with. And then our other horse, who we bought him in early May. So he's a horse who my husband was riding a fair bit last year. A trainer, a coach who's a friend of mine, had him as sort of a lesson horse. His name is Tiki. He is gloriously magnificent. He's an older gentleman now. He's what we would call a senior citizen horse. He's 23, I think, this year, but he is a retired like top level show jumper. He used to jump all of the very very big things, and now he's sort of retired to a quieter life. Um, and he and my husband have loads of fun just um, sort of wandering around in the fields together, jumping tiny jumps. Tiki's embracing feral farm horse life. He gets to eat lots of grass and gets spoiled with loads of snacks and treats and things like that. Trying to find a good photo of him. So yeah, we've got the two of them, Tiki and Craterus, and then loads of another horse I ride, Rebel. He's Craterus's best buddy, and so we do a lot of jumping and medieval skill at arms and things like that together. So I think we have our first event this weekend somehow already. But yeah, it's pretty neat. Pretty lucky to have the ponies. There we go.
Yeah, and
Here's
for
Tiki.
folks wondering, the cat that keeps poking her head in the corner is actually named Cleopatra after Alexander's sister. So
Yeah, so here's Tiki doing what he does best, and that is stuffing his face with huge quantities of food. And because he's missing a couple teeth too, so then he just like dribbles it all over you. But yeah, he's delightful. Everyone's like he is perfect. I mean, he is just the perfect horse. Everyone who meets him absolutely falls in love with him. So
all
yeah.
right. Well, thank you very much. And again, I will put in the show notes links so you can go find some of Carolyn's stuff, including her book. And if you've got any fun videos of you doing archery or things, send them to me and I'll include those so people
Let me
can
see
see
what
you
I
in
can find.
action.
Yeah.
See you in action. All
Sounds
right.
good. All right.
So thank you very much. And just a reminder for folks, if you've enjoyed this, subscribe, click the like button. And also we will be posting on Friday some of the videos from the Argid network. I've mentioned that. So there's going to be 4 videos that all go up at once where you can be a fly on a wall at essentially talks, academic talks and conferences and see what we do in our spare time, so to speak. All right. So everybody have a good day.